Welcome to Health and Wellness with Dr. Ed. I'm Dr. Edmund Sulkowski. Let's do a little in-house cleaning today. We're going to be changing the name of the show to the Dr. Ed Show, where we're still going to focus on health and wellness. We may include that in our title as well. But we're going to talk about all aspects of living, all aspects of health, and eventually that leads to wellness. You can't have wellness without health, and you're not going to have health without wellness, so they work together. You can also listen to me every Saturday morning live at AM 1250 The Answer, 92.5 FM, now on Twitter, iTunes, Spotify. I mean, there's so many. But what I'd like you to do is go to rumble.com, search the Dr. Ed Show, and then you can like us or whatever that. What do they do? I don't know what they do on Rumble because I haven't been on Rumble actually. But you search Dr. Ed Show, and then you can go ahead and then follow the directions, and then follow us on the Dr. Ed Show on Rumble. And those shows from AM 1250 The Answer are going to be archived there, plus I'm doing monthly blogs as well, all related to health and wellness. We have an important guest on the show today, and she was on the radio show last week actually. Her show hasn't been put up yet, but it will be up soon. And that is Judge Patricia McCullough. Judge, welcome to Health and Wellness with Dr. Ed, soon the Dr. Ed Show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being here.
You know, it was so exciting for me to meet you and talk about the court systems. And I think the general public isn't aware. We hear court, and we know we don't want to be in court. We don't want to end up in court.
Right.
At times we do. So I think to start the show off today, we really need to talk about what the court system is. And I know there's a separation between a Pennsylvania court and a federal courts, and there's a separation between county courts and state courts. I mean, it seems to me to be a little bit overwhelming. So let's start at that bottom line. I think on the radio show, you mentioned that it's like a pyramid. Yes. So let's start at that base, and that would be the minor court.
Well, you're making a really good point, because as I go around the state, when I speak at different places, people will say, Commonwealth Court, you're not in my county. But the Commonwealth Court is a statewide appellate court, and then the common pleas courts is what they confuse that with. So if you look at a pyramid, we have 67 trial courts. Those are the courts of common pleas. There's one in every county in Pennsylvania, all 67 counties. They hear the trials, civil and criminal. That's also family and orphan court divisions all across those counties. In fact, I had served in the family court, in the trial court in Allegheny County, and was assigned to the family division of that court. So after those trials, jury trials, or trials by a judge, where the jury or the judge is the fact finder, an opinion or a verdict or a judgment will be entered. Depending on what the topic is, what the topic is that was the focus of that case, an appeal will go up. Now we're in our pyramid, and we go up to the top part of the pyramid to one of the two statewide intermediate appellate courts. One is Superior Court. They hear criminal and civil appeals that involve without governmental parties. The other statewide intermediate appellate court is the Commonwealth Court of Pennsylvania, on which I sit for 12 plus years. And I love this court because we call it the People's Court. We uphold the rights of the people as impacted by government action. And unlike any other court, an appellate court in the entire country, it has original and appellate jurisdiction. So what does that mean?
Yeah, that's confusing.
It is.
And I think we need to define the word appellate. My understanding is a case has already gone at the lower courts, the Court of Common Pleas, and a decision has been rendered either by a judge or a jury, right, and then someone didn't like the decision or was
one or
unhappy.
The other side.
Yeah, and so they take it to a higher court. Is that really what an appellate court is?
Yes, they take the decision to a higher court. They appeal to a higher court to review the decision below from the trial court. And it can be one or the other party. And if you want to get really complicated, even the winning party can file a cross appeal if there's a particular issue in the judgment or verdict that they want to challenge. But those cases, when they don't like the decision, you have to take an appeal to the statewide intermediate appellate courts.
So before you became a judge, you went to law school, University of Pittsburgh, both as an undergrad, received your BA,
Yes.
and then went on to get your JD
Yes.
from the University of Pittsburgh. You're a local person.
I'm a local person. I'm born and bred here
in Pittsburgh,
Allegheny
here in
County,
the Burgh.
Pittsburgh, yes.
And you were a practicing attorney, and you started off as a clerk. What is a clerk?
Well, there are different kinds of clerks. Throughout law school, I was a law clerk working in the district attorney's office. So I kept running back and forth from Pitt, taking a bus, going downtown to do work in the DA's office, which I was in the appellate division, so I was writing responses and drafts of opinions to pleadings that were filed in criminal matters.
So you're doing a lot of the research
Yes.
for the district attorney.
Yes.
And
In the appellate division is what we were, we had a number of us in there doing that work. It was really a great experience. But clerk, then there's judicial law clerk. And when I first graduated from law school, I was a judicial law clerk for a trial court judge, which also meant helping to draft opinions, do research, draft our memorandum, do research on various issues, and sit in on all the trials, because the judge that I worked for handled the entire civil trial list. So he presided over cases without a jury and cases with a jury. He was really a smart.
So what does that mean, civil cases?
Civil would be non-criminal. So criminal would be anything involving any type of violation of a criminal law, statute, whatever. Civil is when it's between private parties, companies or persons. It could be violation of a contract, alleging breach of oil and gas arrangements. So anytime that the government is not involved, it would be considered, for the most part, just in a general sense, in the civil arena. What happens, though, in the Commonwealth Court is that we review all of the trial court opinions and all of the local agency and state opinions or decisions involving anything with the government. So that's property, taxes, right-to-know law, elections, redistricting, zoning, education, schools, churches, freedom of religion issues involving the government action. And so we uphold the rights of the people as impacted by government action. And if it's in our appellate jurisdiction, I don't know if you've ever watched, but on PCN at night, people will watch they tape our appellate arguments at the Supreme, Superior, and Commonwealth Courts. That's when you see judges in robes sitting at a bench, and lawyers or the parties are arguing before us, and it goes back and forth. That's appellate. That's what it looks like for appellate. But in the Commonwealth Court of Pennsylvania, we also have original jurisdiction, which means that we sit. Remember, I told you I sat as a trial court judge in the Court of Common Pleas, but now we sit as trial judges at the statewide level for everything involving a statewide issue with the governor, the Senate, the House, elections, redistricting, and many other issues. And so we put on the robe and we sit at the bench by ourselves, and we have courtrooms where we conduct the trials. There can also be jury trials, but that's a little more unique in the court, but there have been some.
In the appellate court.
In the appellate court.
In the Court of Common
ours. Yes.
Pleas, that's very common.
It's very common in the Court of Common Pleas, and in criminal matters, the people have a right to ask for a jury trial, and they have a right to ask for a timely trial, especially in a criminal matter. So those are all issues that can be raised by the parties. It's fascinating. I mean, when you think about it. But one of the things, so the Supreme Court then is at the pinnacle of the pyramid, and some of our cases in the original jurisdiction, they can automatically go to the Supreme Court. Otherwise, the court decides what cases it will hear, generally in the Superior and the Commonwealth Court of Pennsylvania jurisdictions. So people have to apply for aliquotter or whatever other petitions they have to file from the intermediate appellate courts, statewide appellate courts. And I will say for the top three courts, the intermediate appellate and the Supreme Court, our jurisdiction is statewide. So we sit in Pittsburgh, we sit in Harrisburg, and we sit in Philadelphia.
So you're actually moving to these different locations.
That's what we do. We move to the locations. And say, during COVID, when they had all the restrictions, everything was starting to get closed down. We continued in our court, we continued right away to continue to open the proceedings to the people by doing things online at first. And so we would have arguments, if we were doing panels, we would do them online so that the people still had access to the courts. And then not long after the restrictions were imposed, we set up our courtrooms so we had health protections everywhere, because we didn't want to stop the parties from coming into the court. So we had people ordered, like our staff, they were so good about it, they ordered plastic shields that would be in front of the plaintiffs or the petitioners, in front of the defendants and the respondents.
Yeah, and nice response, but
witness box,
medically
everything.
A ridiculous response, all of that was, in my opinion. But
well,
I know you
and
did
I'm not
what
getting,
you. Yeah, I know
I
you don't
can't
want to go
opine on
there.
something I didn't write a decision on,
Yeah.
so I have to reserve my comment
but
on that.
you did what you had to do so that people had
Yes.
their rights protected.
So they get into court, and even people were allowed to participate in that, because many times they were not getting into court. And we felt it was really important to do that in our kind of a court, especially because we have that original jurisdiction.
So after being a clerk, you went on into private practice as an attorney, and you saw a wide gambit of cases. You
yeah.
were an attorney for that. So you're getting, in your background, to become a judge, this broad perspective of what's really going on in everyday lives of people.
Yeah, I have to tell you, as my career would go along, and I'd be like, okay, Lord, why am I doing this? And why am I doing that? Well, everything that I had the opportunity to do ended up being things that come into this court. But I wasn't planning for that. But it was kind of like you pray and get direction. So, for instance, I was in-house general counsel, assistant general counsel at the University of Pittsburgh for like 10 years. And we handled the taxes, contract disputes, property issues. I did all of the, these don't come in, well, yes, they do, some, to the extent there are universities involved. The TV syndication contracts for athletics. It was fascinating. I did all the coaches' contracts. So I knew, and I still can't say, what the buyouts were and what language I try to put in there that may or may not have gotten put into the contracts. But I had intellectual property. I did at the beginning, before there was a UPMC, practice plans for the physicians. And so I get this wide berth of experience. It was like once the general counsel would say, well, you touched it, now that's your area. So you had to develop your expertise in all those areas. I think I had 8 areas, student, grievances and so forth. And
well, that really, I think, changes your perspective. If you focus, whatever profession you're in, on the one thing that you do, let's say you're a oral surgeon, for example, they focus on those surgery procedures, and they're kind of clueless on what else is involved, restorative parts of things and so forth. But what it sounds like to me is you're getting this bit of this part of what law is, a bit of what everybody's doing in their daily lives, and it's all coming across your desk, and you're having to deal with it. So that perspective really had to have changed you from what you learned in law school into what actual life is.
Practical application, there's no substitute. And the nonprofit corporation law, working for a state-related university, those are the same issues that come into the court I'm on now. And then I had the opportunity to work for, actually as a trial court judge. I ended up being assigned to the family division. And they usually put you there when you're first. I had been appointed by the governor and the state senate to fill a vacancy. And that's usually where they put a new judge, because they feel like to train you. Plus, I couldn't handle the other areas that I had done. I had been the chair and a member of the Property Board of Appeals for the county. So there you go again, the property tax issues and exemptions, which is two other issues that come into this court, the trying of the hearings, and then ending up being a trial court judge. But in the family division, I had never really done anything in the family division. But God showed me something in there that really changed how I think I approach everything in the system. Because in the morning, I would see these newborn babies who were addicted to crack cocaine because their mother was suffering from an addiction problem. Had to place them. Then the younger children, the toddlers and infants that were being neglected and abused, having to place them. And I would always pray that a family member, a grandmother, or someone would come in so that I didn't have to put them into a foster home. But when the danger is so high to place the child back, I mean, you wouldn't believe some of the things that had been happening to these children. And so they couldn't go back into the same environment, but at the same time we could get the parents help to try, because the whole idea was to restore the family together again. So you work to try to make that happen, but you have to, for safety reasons, remove the child until that's done. And then I would have teenagers coming in who said their parents would bring them in under an Act 53 program because they were worried they were getting addicted to alcohol, drugs. And of course, the kids that really had an issue that would come in, and we would have hearings, many hearings, the ones that were really struggling, were always in denial that they didn't have a problem. And yet, they couldn't talk to their parents. They wouldn't even look at them. Some of them would, you could see there was a loathing. But we would have a professional come in and do a professional assessment on that child. And when they came back and testified, if there was evidence that they were addicted, then the court can send them to inpatient treatment center for 45 days. And then we get reports every 15 days to see how the child is doing. And I'll tell you, whenever they came back into the court, they were a totally different person, because at least at that point, they had at least withdrawn or were clean at that point. And they would come back loving their parents. They were talking about their plans for the future. It was my opportunity to say just one or two words of positive affirmation to that child to get them to now take a different direction. And of course, you have to still come alongside of them to help them, because it's an ongoing battle. And that was very emotional for me. But I did have a lot of kids that I think were able to turn around and not suffer the consequences.
I would think that it could almost become a burden for you, because you're listening to this and you're seeing how it impacts and destroys lives. And I know you have, as a judge, laws that are written that you have to follow, and you have to integrate those laws into the lives for the benefit of that person without negative impact. That's got to be a very difficult thing to put all those pieces of that puzzle together.
At that point in my life, I realized that what I was doing then was the most emotionally compelling legal experience I had ever had, because I had to read the record of that child, and especially for the younger kids. And later, as they became delinquent, and then in the afternoons, I was hearing protections from abuse hearings, contempts for support. So I'm seeing the adults, and it was like God was showing me this pattern of behavior, different people, but a pattern. Someone can start out being the victim, and if they don't get help, if we don't see them as society, or as a church, as a synagogue, somebody to come around them and say, we love you, you have value, you are gifted, and we want to encourage you with that and develop it. And that, God put that really a strong burden on my heart, because I think there were two cases that really stand out, well, three. One young boy And you're not allowed to talk to the kids while they come in because you always have to speak to counsel. There's like 10 lawyers in the room.
So they all come with representation?
All of them, everybody. And his head was down on the table the whole time. And finally I said to his counsel, I said, can you ask your client why he has had his head down on the table the entire time?
Welcome back to Health and Wellness, Dr. Ed Show. You know, we had a little disruption over here, and we just go with the flow, and that's I think what you got to do in life. But Judge McCullough was telling us a story about a young boy who had his head down. And what we're going to do is going to start from the beginning of that story again. And it's a very compelling story. And the first question, Judge, I have to ask before that, why as a judge are you not allowed to talk to that little boy?
Because
directly?
He's represented by counsel.
So everything has to go through the...
Everything has to go through counsel, just like any party. Anybody who comes into court with counsel, the judge addresses the counsel. They're supposed to speak on their behalf.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so you had this little boy.
Well,
he was roughly about 12 years old?
Probably this young man, yes.
And he had his head down the whole time that you were...
He had his head on the table the entire time of the hearing, and I'm not allowed to ask him directly because he has counsel. So, I mean, there's lots of rules, you know. And so I asked his attorney, I said, can you ask your client, why has he had his head down on the table the whole time? And he hardly could pick his head up, and finally he's saying that he had just been put on new medications, like several new medications that made his head hurt, medications for behavior that made his head hurt so much he couldn't pick it up. And I'm thinking, he can't function. What are we doing? What are we doing with a young boy who at 12 who has to be, and then his lawyer told me he's on about 10 meds. And I thought, this is unbelievable. How can he be expected to do anything in life? So I had entered an order at the time to tell the physician, put him on something, that's not going to give us a headache, because I can't say, take him off all the medications. Right. I can't do that. And then I said, can you please, and ordered also, go back and see if there's just one that you can put him on. Like, what are we doing with this child? And so that was one issue. There's so many. I don't want to not get into the other cases that I've handled, like running a nonprofit faith-based agency and that, but these are such, they reflect what's happening in society. There was one.
And you're sitting in the position to make a change, to make a difference.
And that's what was so rewarding. If I gave one positive word of affirmation, it was amazing to me how much the child would respond. And because they think some of them needed discipline, some of them didn't believe in themselves. And there was one little boy who, I'm reading his file, his record, and I can see all these, he's been abused every way imaginable since he was an infant, and everything.
We're going to do a cliffhanger here.
Okay.
We're going to go to a break. When we come back,
All
you're going to finish that story for us, please. We'll be back at Health and Wellness with Dr. Ed, with Judge McCullough. Welcome back to Health and Wellness with Dr. Ed. We're here with Judge McCullough, and Judge, you were talking about I think I could see the emotion in your voice, hear it, and see the expression on your face. A very difficult case that you were on the bench with, involving a little boy that was abused. Can you tell us about that?
They actually were all difficult emotionally, but this one little boy especially, he had been abused since he was an infant. In every way imaginable. And so it was the first and only time I ever had to have a hearing on a termination of an adoption. He had been adopted after being in the system for a long time because he had to be removed from his home because it was so bad. And finally he was adopted. And I'm thinking, you know, when I first thought, I'm thinking, how can anybody terminate an adoption of a child that's been through so much? And I'm reading his record, and I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to pick up my head and actually look at this child without just, you know, wanting to go run over and hug him? But when I was reading it, I could see he had started to manifest the behavior that had been done on him, and it was becoming a danger to the family's other child. It was serious. And so I'm picturing maybe like, you know, a rather large, you know, child at that age. He was like 9, I think. And when I finally picked up my eyes to look at him, he was this beautiful, very delicate, angelic looking little boy. And to me it was just overwhelming that now here he was. I couldn't not allow this because he had become a danger to the child in the home, and the parents had tried and tried, but he kept manifesting the same behavior that had been done on him. So I had to place him somewhere. I chose a place that I know was a faith-based agency, and I knew that the attorney who actually ran it, because he was a year ahead of me in law school, and I knew that he would be well cared for and loved in the interim to see what was going to happen to him. But just having to place him there, to me, was too much. It was very overwhelming. And I did follow up with that agency, you know, for a time to make sure that he was okay.
Which is not a requirement for you as
Oh,
a
no,
judge.
it's not a requirement, no, but I wanted to make sure he was okay because he had just touched my heart so much, what he had been through, not at his fault. And I think he was making great progress there, because I have to say, most of the programs that I work with, I've found to be now are faith-based, not because they promote any particular denomination. Nobody has to have any faith at all to participate in them, but they're holistic because they treat the body, the mind, and the soul. And they're very successful. That's why I work with them. Programs for veterans, for youth at risk, drug addiction, now with human trafficking, and various other programs. One to reduce recidivism. I taught as a volunteer in the jails for 6 years. I started the year before I ran for the court that I'm on. It was after I had finished my term in the trial court. Because I had met the chaplain, and after going through the trial court and seeing how these children could be helped when a grandparent or somebody came along and then started giving them some direction and taking them to a synagogue, a church where there was accountability, where there was affirmation. So I started teaching in the jails for 6 years, and the program was, here's an example of how well it worked, other than to tell you that the national rate of recidivism is 40 to 60%. Those who participated in this program from beginning to end, it was 8 to 12. Now that's astounding.
Yeah, it is.
And so in my heart, it's like, we need to have programs available to people like this. Not everybody is successful. Not everybody will be. But it helps to be fewer victims in the future, helps the generation of that family member to now have a chance to succeed, helps that person become a contributing member to society. And one of the biggest things I found there is that we would teach psychological, social concepts. My class was called Confronting Stinking Thinking. And a lot of it was about themselves. They, you know, what had been done to them or what they had done. They had total unforgiveness. They couldn't forgive, so there was a lot of anger. And once they realized and they could accept, you know, look at these things that happened to you in your life because of this. There's an author, speaker who said it so well, Joyce Meyer. She said, if unforgiveness is like drinking a cup of poison and thinking you're going to kill the other person, it kills the person who's harboring it. And once they got to that point, here's what happens. I was in Harrisburg after a couple of years of working volunteering in the program, and I was at a big conference, and a woman ran up to me with she was nicely dressed, big smile on her face, and comes up and gives me a hug, and She goes, you don't remember where you met me, do you? Well, at the time I was campaigning for the court I'm on. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I've been all over Pennsylvania. She goes, no, you met me in the Hope Pod. I met her there. And now she's out and has a successful life. She could turn it around. She could go back and be with her kids. The people that she might have, hurt before, she made amends. So it's a plus for our society. And the reduction in recidivism, the taxpayer dollars that go into funding the jails, the institutions, is it's staggering. And if we could do that and have this success, why not?
You're keeping somebody out of prison and making them productive in society.
Well,
basically what ends up happening.
It's exactly what happens, and they have a chance to have success in their lives. They can make amends to whoever was the victim. And it can't, certain serious crimes, you can't do that if it's certain violent crimes.
And there are some people that are chronic with
yes,
this.
they can participate in the programs, but they're not going to be, it has to be when you're going to be let out anyway, or because there's a high rate of recidivism, people get let out and they go right back in because they're still struggling with the same issues that they had when they went in. That doesn't change someone's sentence, like if they're in there for murder, but it could change their mindset and how maybe they can be doing things that are constructive in there and reach out to to their families and that and healing.
What you're doing here is beyond what the courts do.
It's beyond, but and one of the other things I had, besides private practice, doing professional employment contracts and state and zoning, property issues, and other miscellaneous. I did litigation. I also headed up a faith-based social service agency and oversaw the implementation of its free health care center. And because people don't have health care, we don't realize those that don't have health care, and so there was health care for those that were impoverished. And no, we don't have to do it, but I feel like it's our roots. Because if you look at the inscription inside the dome in the Capitol in Harrisburg, William Penn's words are inscribed there. And he says that God would make it a holy experiment. Here, Pennsylvania. He founded and established Pennsylvania. And he said that God would make it a holy experiment, the seed of a nation, that we would do the thing that is truly wise and just, for the nations need a precedent. And I think that's our roots in Pennsylvania. As Pennsylvania goes, so goes the nation. And any part that we're involved in, I think we have that we should have a burning desire to try to improve the system. One, to make it more accountable to the people, and two, to be efficient and successful. That's the vision he had. He wanted people to be able to live together that way.
And you're doing that right now. You're running for Supreme Court, judge of the Supreme Court. That's the top little piece of the triangle in this pyramid that you've talked about, going from municipal court all the way up to the top. Your motivation for that, I think you just explained very well, is we need to look after the rights of the people. So we have something in the state called a Constitution, and we have a Pennsylvania Constitution, and then we have a federal Constitution. You have this little card, and I think you call these palm cards.
Palm cards. Yeah.
And that's what you hand out when you're campaigning. And
Right.
like I said, you're Judge Patricia McCullough, who sits on the Commonwealth Court right now, is running for the highest appellate court, and that's the Supreme Court. And that's the top of the state court before anything goes to the federal level. Am I right in that?
Well, it's the court right above mine. My decisions now currently form the basis of their review in areas of our jurisdiction. It doesn't necessarily go to the federal courts after it goes to the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. It depends on the kind of case that's filed. You could start in federal court, you could start in state court. Some of the state court opinions in Pennsylvania could go right to the U.S. Supreme Court, and there have been in the last couple of years a lot of election matters, people challenging election integrity have gone, and redistricting have gone to the U.S. Supreme Court, not necessarily having been heard there, but that's where they have gone.
Because you can redistrict and actually change an outcome of an election, couldn't you?
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, you mentioned the Constitution, and it's an oath that all judges take, that we're going to uphold the Constitution of Pennsylvania and the Constitution of the United States. Judges also say we'll be fair and impartial and uphold the rule of law. But I see that we are in a constitutional crisis. So while I love the court that I'm on, when we're in a constitutional crisis, see, because how you uphold the Constitution is the key.
Well, that's the backbone, is it not?
It's the backbone. It's our law. And Pennsylvania, William Penn's founding documents, form the basis of the United States Constitution. Another reason why I feel so compelled to uphold it as written.
Well, let me be a devil here. Is the constitutional not fluid?
Yes. So see, now, no, but yes to the fact that that's often the argument, and that's the difference. How do you view the Constitution? Is it do we look at it like a strict constitutionalist, originalist? It says what it says. And justices on the Supreme Court, like Scalia, Thomas, that's the viewpoint they would take. Others view it as a living, breathing document. But a good point to think about, if it was supposed to be not viewed as what it actually says, why would they have permitted for an amendment process? Because if you're going to amend the Constitution, you have to go through the process for the U.S. Constitution, same as you have to do in the Pennsylvania Constitution. There would be no need to file for amendments if it could be interpreted as this living, breathing document. And there's a danger in doing it that way. Because if you can change the Constitution by minimizing or eliminating any right, then you can eliminate them all. One fellow, when I was at an event, and he said, well, all the constitutional rights aren't so important to me. And I said, really? I said, do you value your Second Amendment? He said, oh, absolutely. And I said, well, you know, it's not a smorgasbord. If one right can be taken from you, they all can. Because, as you can see in the Declaration of Independence, what was recognized by the framers, and especially that Thomas Jefferson, William Penn, Jefferson said Penn was the greatest lawgiver, that you can't change what's already there, or you will lose what you have. They are inalienable rights, which means they come from God. And you cannot take a right. That is the whole concept. You cannot take it. It cannot be violated by the government. That was the whole point. The U.S. Constitution is prescriptive that here are the rights you can't interfere with, and the state constitutions say, well, here's how we handle our rights. Here's what they are. Doesn't mean those are your only rights. You still have other rights, as the Constitution says.
And it seems to me that there's been so many challenges to that Constitution.
There have been, yes.
Even in trying to redirect it, I don't know if that's the proper term, or make those rights less effective for us.
Well, and that's one of the reasons I'm running. There's 3 reasons I'm running. One is experience. I'm the only appellate court judge on the ticket on this ticket, and the only appellate court judge across both tickets that has 12 plus years of appellate court experience upholding the rights, the constitutional rights and liberty of the people. Having been a trial court judge, I am ready to hit the ground running on day 1. And some of these examples, you have to have, this day and age, the courage and the conviction to uphold the Constitution as written. I've been threatened for some of my opinions. I've been subject to false and misleading personal political attacks by the party elite. Yet they say I'm such a good judge, they don't want to lose me on the Commonwealth Court. The costs can be high in this day and age, but the cost of losing our sacred rights and liberties as a nation is much higher. So what are some of the examples? Last year, I upheld the Second Amendment 4 times, just last year alone. Another case, I joined a small majority where we limited the governor's COVID restrictions. Another case, a small majority, we declared the mail-in ballot law to be unconstitutional. And there's a reason why. It's not that we're saying the mail-in ballot law, you can't have mail-in ballots. It's the way that it was passed. Under the Constitution, you have two ways to vote. One is in person, one is in absentia, and that is prescribed in the Constitution as absentee ballots. You have to be sick, out of the country, working a poll. You had to qualify. And when they passed the mail-in ballot law, they eliminated, essentially, the argument, as raised by the parties, they eliminated all the requirements. You can vote mail-in ballot for any or no reason at all. And so it was amending the Constitution. But if you're going to amend the Constitution, we just talked about that, you have to comply with the procedure. General Assembly has to vote on it twice, and then it has to go to a vote to the people.
But that didn't happen.
It didn't happen here. Another example, I had opined at a healthcare worker who was terminated because they wanted to wear a mask instead of take a COVID shot. We're going to lose our unemployment comp benefits. And my opinion said, that's not willful misconduct. You have a medical right to self-determination, and I quoted Justice Rehnquist. You have a medical right to self-determination about what to put in your body. Now, hospitals have to protect the health of their patients, right? But if you assert a religious exemption or any of the others, in many instances, they were allowed to wear a mask. And that was viewed as still protecting the health of the patients. But because a person asserted a medical right to self-determination, they were not allowed to wear a mask, they were fired, and they were losing their unemployment comp. And I said, that is not willful misconduct. But unfortunately, I was the minority opinion in that case. Another example of what's happening is congressional redistricting, which are the cases where we decide who votes in which district, how are they set up. It's a complicated procedure to go through it, but the legislature under the Constitution gets to draw these maps. It affects how you elect your congressmen and persons. And so the legislature drew a map, and the governor vetoed it. So last year it came into court, and I was appointed in our original jurisdiction as the judge to preside, the trial court judge to preside. We had like 13 different parties and maps, and the evidence comes in. And the bottom line is that the governor's expert witness testified that the legislator's map was a good map. It was a constitutional map. So my 220-page opinion said, in the proper exercise of judicial restraint, if the legislature has the right to draw the map, and even though the governor can veto it, if his expert witness says it's a good map and a constitutional map, we have to pick that map. On appeal, that's not what happened. The Supreme Court picked a different map from another party that they said most similarly reflected the one they had a professor draw 3 years before. And then in 2020, I was the only judge in the entire country to order a governor to stop certifying the congressional presidential election because of the unconstitutionality of the mail-in ballot law. I was attacked by people around the country for that. But the sad thing is they don't realize I'm protecting the integrity of the election for them. That's what I was doing. And as I already described to you, why we opined that the mail-in ballot law was unconstitutional. Because if you can change the Constitution by passing an act that amends the Constitution without going through the process of giving it to a vote to the people, then they can pass any act they want at any time. Now, when the cases went up to the Supreme Court, they didn't rule the way that we did, so now the mail-in ballot law is the law of the land, and you know we're having so many various issues with this mail-in ballots, whether they have to be dated, whether you count them. There's a federal, you know, you were talking about the federal courts. The federal courts have a case where they said, if you don't count it, you're violating a person's civil rights. And there's many more examples of things that are happening. And to me, you have to have the courage and conviction to uphold the Constitution, no matter what.
Well, you know, those are the laws, and if you circumvent them illegally, there's a problem. I see it that way. Mm-hmm. And I personally know people that went to vote who told they were already voted, even though they never asked for a mail-in ballot, never submitted a mail-in ballot, but they were already counted as having cast their vote. So I think there are issues with those, and that's why you got to follow the law. Mm-hmm. And if people that are that are circumventing it are doing it because they have an agenda. That's, I think that's
Well,
the way the average person sees that as well.
I can't comment on that because I cannot opine on something I haven't opined on already. There certainly are a lot of stories, but as I tell people, if you have something, you have to come into court with it, because nothing can be done about it until you come into court. So, the stories won't do anything unless people can come into court and then have a hearing, try their case to establish
that start
that.
at the common pleas court then, or?
If you're challenging a state law, that would come into our court, a challenge to the constitutionality, and many of those cases have. They come into our court to challenge the constitutionality of it. If it's a local election, then maybe you would go in just into the courts of common pleas to raise the allegations there. And there have been some cases, but and I can't opine on something that hasn't come before the court in a hearing with the evidence, and I don't know if we'll see that, but I mean, there's a lot of I think public backlash to people even trying to raise it, so I don't know what will happen.
So, running for this position as judge of the Supreme Court of the state of Pennsylvania, it seems to me you're the only Republican candidate who really has this appellate court experience. Why is that important to me?
Because you want someone who's ready to hit the ground running. And judges and judicial candidates are not allowed to tell you how they're going to rule. Remember, I said I can't opine on certain things. We can only say as candidates that we are going to uphold the Constitution of the United States and of Pennsylvania, be fair and impartial, uphold the rule of law. But when you have someone that has experience, and for 12 years, is what I've been doing this 12 plus years, has a record of upholding the Constitution, you can look at those cases. You can look at the circumstances. What did that person have to endure? And realize that person already proved that they're going to uphold the Constitution no matter what, and has the experience to hit the ground running on day one. We don't have time in a constitutional crisis for a learning curve or wondering how someone, might have voted in prior cases. Can't say how you're going to vote in the future.
And that's important, because I do believe we are in a constitutional crisis. And, I've seen evidence of this over the years. So this election is a primary election that's occurring on Tuesday, May 16th, I believe,
right,
is the date. And so people that are registered Republicans vote for candidates on the Republican Party. Democrats will vote for candidates on the Democratic Party. So how many Republicans are running for this position?
2. And 2 Democrats.
2.
So after the primary, because there's one vacancy on the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, the birthplace of the one nation under God. So there's one seat. So this is a critical election for the future of Pennsylvania. Right now, the court, and I hate to say, 4 Democrats, 2 Republicans right now. This would make it 4 and 3. But because judges aren't supposed to vote by party, they're supposed to be impartial. But to me, it's very important that you are ruling by the Constitution as written and protecting the rights and liberties of the people.
And it appears that one party seems to be a little more constitutional oriented and one party isn't, in my personal opinion. But I think that's why it's important that we get certain people like you in this key position. This is at the apex of our court system.
And I'm
here.
the only one running on this ticket who's an appellate court judge, have been for 12 years. So I already have that experience. I've already demonstrated I have the conviction to uphold the Constitution as written no matter what. And I think it's important for judges to take a stand for the people.
We hear this, we the people, for the people. Is that an important statement?
Absolutely. Our declaration, we the people, in the Pennsylvania Constitution, we the people. It's a government of the people, by the people, for the people. If we forget that, then who are we? We don't have constitutional rights. The whole purpose of the Constitution and the Declaration was to establish the rights in the people. It's their government. And so, to me, it's important to remember that I work for you. I work for every person who's watching this show. when I was standing for retention after 10 years, some people said, don't go out because you don't need to go out for retention. Somebody might say something about one of your cases. And I thought, but I work for the people. And I can't get to as many people because I'm not allowed to do political things unless I'm running. So I went out, and fortunately I didn't hear any negative things, but I was open to hearing from the people. That's who I work for. So, and it's critical. If we take the rights of the people away, we are taking away what has been viewed as inalienable rights given by God to the people. My desire, though, is that more people would learn about their constitutional rights and become more informed, because they won't get that information from a newspaper article or watching certain TV stations for news, because it's reels of opinions.
We're at the end of the show. It was a fast show. We did have a little disruption here today, but that's fun too. I would like you to look at that camera. Which camera should Judge look at, and really tell the voters out there about this primary election and why they should be casting their vote for you if they're Republican.
Well, we have to vote. You have to vote like your future depends on it, because it does. The lives of our children and our children's children are on the line. They are at stake in this election. So I'm asking you to help me to continue to uphold our constitutional rights and liberties by electing me to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And let's keep our government strong, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. I thank you. May 16th, get out there, and God bless you.
Get out and vote. Judge, I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
After your
Doctor.
win here in the primary, we're going to have you back on it, because that election in November is going to be crucial.
It's crucial.
And
well, by the grace of God, I'll be back. Okay.
We'll see you.
Thank
God
you.
bless you.
Thank you. God bless you.
Godspeed to you.
Thank you.
Remember, a healthy pet is a happy pet. When you're healthy, you're happy as well. And you can listen to me live every Saturday morning from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. on AM 1250, The Answer. And you can actually call in with your questions. God bless. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Okay.